students. So we've got one more part of this to go through, and this is something that's pretty important in trigonometry, to have a process to figure this out really kind of quickly in your head. Trigonometry is very picky about signs. So what we're going to do is we're going to determine in the different quadrants if the trig function takes on a positive or negative value. So let me just demonstrate this real quick on my calculator. You want to make sure you're in degree mode is right now. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just let's just work with the sine. Okay, so if I'm going to pick a quadrant 1 angle. Okay, I get a positive answer. Okay, and in fact, every time you do a sine of a quadrant 1 angle, you get a positive answer, and there's a reason for that. Okay, let's take a quadrant 2 angle. So let's take like 123 degrees. That's in quadrant 2. Again, I get a positive value, and you always will. Sine of any quadrant 2 angle is positive. Okay, let's go to quadrant 3. Well, let's do just like 182. That's in quadrant 3. Notice I get a negative answer. Okay, and let's go to the sine of 352 degrees. That's quadrant 4. I get a negative answer. So what you'll find on this is it's always the same. The sine is positive in quadrants 1 and 2, and it's negative in quadrants 3 and 4. And that's what we're going to try to figure out. It's just a couple of strategies for how to do this in your head. So I'm going to go through the terminology. We'll just kind of figure this out together. And to begin with, you have to understand, of course, how graphing goes. So if you're in quadrant 1, you would have like a point, both x and y are positive, and r in a circle is the radius, so that's always positive. R will always be positive in a circle. A radius is positive. Okay, if you plotted a point in quadrant 2, an example would be -2, 5. Okay, that's left 2, up 5 is where that dot is. So x is negative, y is positive. Okay, if you go to quadrant 3, an example would be -3, -6. If you plotted that point, you would go left 3, down 6. You'd be in quadrant 3. So notice both x and y take on negative values. And in quadrant 4, an example would be 4, -2. You would go over 4, down 2 to be in quadrant 4, so you'd have a positive x and a negative y. Okay, you don't memorize that. If you understand how to plot points, then you know that already. Okay, so here's the unit circle definitions that we learned. Remember, in a unit circle, this is when r is equal to 1. The sine is just the y value of the point. The cosecant's the reciprocal. The cosine is the x value of the point on the unit circle. Secant is the reciprocal. And the tangent is a ratio of y over x in your point, and a cotangent is x over y. Okay? So what we're going to do is, based on this diagram and the definitions of the trig functions, we're just going to figure these things out then. All right? So let me get this set up so we can kind of see what I'm doing here. All right, so here's kind of what we're going to look at. Okay, so if you're in quadrant 1, everything's positive. So basically, x is positive, y is positive, and r is positive. Okay, everything's positive. So the sign would be y over r. Positive over positive is a positive answer. The cosine would be positive, not x, positive over positive. You'd be dividing two positives, so it's positive. The tangent, both y and x, are positive in quadrant 1, so you get a positive value. So what I'm showing you on this essentially is, if you're in quadrant 1 up here, everything's positive. All of your trig functions take on positive values because x, y, and r are all positive numbers. So the result is, all of your trig functions, sine, cosine, and tangent, and the reciprocal values are all going to take on positive values. So that's how we figure that out. Okay, now if we go to quadrant 2, okay, you can kind of look at what we have here. So sine is y over r. In quadrant 2, y is positive. R is always positive. So a positive over a positive is a positive. Cosine's x over r. So you would have negative over positive. So that would take on a negative value. So notice if I did something like cosine of, let's say, 178 degrees. That's quadrant 2. Notice I got a negative value. That's what I just showed you, see. Okay, tangent's y over x. In this quadrant, y is positive and x is negative. So you get a negative value. Okay, so again, what I'm showing you with that is if I take the tangent of a quadrant, if I do a tangent of a quadrant 2 angle, say like 140, notice I get a negative value. All right, so that's what we're doing, and we're trying to figure these things out as we go. Okay, so we got that. Now we go to quadrant 3, and what I want you all to go ahead and do is just, because it's kind of good that you kind of listen and then do a little work. So I want you to see if you can figure out just the next 2 columns here, and then check yourself. Okay, moment of truth. Let's see if you check and see if you got that figured out right. Okay. So in quadrant 3, the sine is negative, cosine's negative, tangent's positive. Tangent's positive because you've got 2 negatives. Okay. And this stuff is easy to verify in the calculator. So I'm going to just pick like a quadrant 3 angle like 185. So if I go sine of 185, let's see what happens. Yeah, I get a negative value like we predicted. Cosine of 185 or 186, as long as it's in quadrant 3, you're also going to get a negative value. Tangent, let's say 190 degrees. You get a positive. Okay, so it's verifiable, of course, on a calculator. All right, but you want to understand how to figure this out in your head. Okay, and then quadrant 4, you should have got negative for sine, positive for cosine, and negative for tangent. Okay, so just taking the sine of each quadrant. Okay, so that's it. Now there's different ways to do this. That's the y part of that. So let's go to the next page. And a couple of things that you want to notice on here that should be logical. The reciprocal trig functions are going to have the same positive and negative sign. So the sine and cosecant will always have the same signs in each quadrant. The cosine and secant will always have the same sign, and the tangent and cotangent will. So if you go back to the diagram we just did, I only did that for sine, cosine, and tangent because, for instance, the cosecant would also be negative in quadrant 4. The secant would be the same as the cosine, and the cotangent would be the same as the tangent. So once you figure out sine, cosine, and tangent, then you know the answer to the other 3 trig functions, is what I'm saying. Okay, now here's a quick thought process. This is what I do, and I do this constantly. I've done this enough times that I kind of feel like I've memorized this by now. But if I need to figure this out, this is what I do. So let's just take the sine and do this. Okay, the sine is the y value. So really, all you do on a unit circle is the sine is going to be positive. Y values are positive above the x-axis. So that happens in 1 and 2. So the sine is going to be positive in 1 and 2. Okay, y values are negative below the x-axis. So that happens in quadrants 3 and 4. So you end up having this. So the sine in quadrants 1 and 2 ends up being positive. The sine in quadrants 3 and 4 ends up being negative. That's how I think of it. I just think of, okay, the sine is positive above, negative below, because it's a y value. Okay, and that's what I kind of summarized here. Sine and cosecant are positive above the x-axis, negative below. And I do that real fast in my head, and then I know what those values are. Okay, the cosine goes like this. So the cosine is the x value in a unit circle. So x values are positive to the right of the y-axis. Okay, so that happens in quadrants 1 and 4. So that would mean that the cosine is positive in 1 and 4. Okay, because x is positive to the right. Okay, and then we have this. We have x values are negative to the left of the y-axis, and that happens in 2 and 3. So that would mean the cosine theta is negative in 2 and 3. Okay, so to summarize this is the way I think of it. Cosine and secant go together because they're reciprocals. So it's positive to the right, negative to the left. Okay, talking about in comparison to the y-axis, right? That's how I do that. Okay, so let's see. The tangent's y over x. So the tangent is going to be positive where x and y have the same sign. Okay, so notice that in quadrant 1 you have a positive over a positive for y over x, and you have a negative over a negative in quadrant 3. Okay, so you have the same sign, so it ends up being positive. So I kind of think of it like that. So you would end up having the tangent of theta is positive in 1 and 3. Okay, y1 because you have a positive over a positive when you're doing y over x. Y quadrant 3 because you have a negative over a negative, and that gives you a positive number. And then the tangent is going to be negative where you have different signs, so that happens in quadrants 1 and 4. So this is kind of how I do this, and how I do this, and this is what I recommend you do. So this is how I look at this. Okay, the sign is the y value. So let me just kind of show you. You don't need to write this down. I'm just trying to show you the thought process that I like you to run through. Okay, so the sign is the y value. That's all it is. So the sign is going to have a positive y value up above. It's going to have a negative y value down below. So that's how I figure that out, and I figure it out fast, see. Okay, the cosine of theta is the x value. Okay, so I'm going to just put cosine here and show you how I figure this out real quick. All right, so here's what I think of. Okay, the cosine, x is positive to the right. Okay, so that would be the two places where the cosine's positive. X is negative to the left, so it would go like that. Okay, all right, and then finally the tangent goes like this. Tangent of theta is y over x. All right, so if I do tangent, I just think about it's positive where the signs are the same, where x and y have the same sign. Okay, so I go like this. Tangent's positive here, and positive here, and then it's negative in opposite quadrants like that. So that's one thing that kind of help you to do that. So again, to summarize, sine is positive above, negative below. Cosine is positive to the right, negative to the left. And the tangent is positive 1 and 3, opposite quadrants, and then negative in 2 and 4. Again, opposite quadrants like that. Okay, that's what I recommend you do. That's better to do it that way and just think kind of in your head than it is to go through all the stuff we did on page 10 here. It's faster. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to try to have you all do is take this, don't look at the previous page or anything, and just see how quickly you can do this. You're just going to circle the correct sign for each of the trig functions in each quadrant. You can kind of time yourself and see how fast you do this, okay? And then resume the recording when you're ready to check. Okay, now by the way, this is like a future test question. I always ask this because it's so important. So here's what you should have come up with. All right, let's just do the sign. It's best, you can do this fast if you just pick one trig function and do it all at the same time. The sign's the y value. So where is y positive? Y is positive above. So that means the sign's positive above. Where is the y value negative? Down below. Okay, that's how it goes. All right. So the cosine is the x value. So you just ask, where is x positive? X is positive to the right. So the cosine's positive in those two quadrants. Where is the x value negative? This way, to the left. So we say negative there, negative there. Okay. The tangent is, where is it positive? Well, there's two places where you would have a positive x and a positive y, which is quadrant 1, or the other places where you have a negative x and a negative y, which is in quadrant 3. Okay? Whoops, hold on. I circled the wrong thing. Oops. That's positive. Negative divided by negative is a positive. So we got that. Okay, and then the tangent would be negative in the opposite quadrants like that. So that's what you should have come up with. So what you're going to notice on this is all of the trig functions are positive in quadrant 1. And then when you get into the other quadrants, you'll always have some of them being negative and some being positive. So if you notice on here, we had, two of the same sign, 2 negatives in each of the other quadrants and 1 positive. Okay, so that's how it goes. Okay, so let's see. Hopefully you did okay and did that fast, and you want to be able to do that just kind of in your head. Okay, so now the next thing I want to do, and this is really the last thing we're going to do here, is in some problems we do, it's always kind of important to be able to determine what quadrant that you're in. So let me explain what we're doing here. What I'm doing is I'm giving you 2 statements. I'm giving you sine is positive, and I'm giving you cosine is negative. So sine's above 0, cosine's below 0. So we're going to figure out what quadrant you would be in if these 2 conditions existed at the same time. So the way I do this is I do this like this. I just draw a quadrant and I do check marks. So let's first of all answer where the sign is positive. The sign is positive in quadrants 1 and quadrants 2. All right, that takes care of that. Now we're going to ask, where is the cosine negative? The cosine's negative to the left, so I put a check mark there and I put a check mark there. Well, these 2 conditions overlap and come together in quadrant 2, so that means this exists in quadrant 2. So if you kind of look at the diagram that you filled out a few minutes ago, notice in quadrant 2 you have a positive sign and a negative cosine, and that does not happen anywhere else. Okay, so that's the way I do it. Is check marks is about the best thing I've come up with to help students understand that. Okay, the next one we'll do the same thing. Let's start with the tangent and where it's positive. Okay, the tangent is positive in quadrants 1 and quadrants 3. Then we want to figure out where the sine is positive. So the sine's positive above. So I'll put a check mark there, check mark there. So where am I? You be in quadrant 1. Okay, you're always going to have 2 check marks overlapping. There will never be a situation where they don't, so that would be quadrant 1. Okay, and again, the only place this happens, if you look at our diagram, is quadrant 1 is the only place where the sine and tangent are both positive at the same time. All right? Okay, so let's see. I'm just going to have you go to the next page and do this real quick, and I'll kind of summarize this to wrap this part up here. Okay, so go ahead and pause. Should be able to do this pretty quickly. Try to do it without looking at the previous page and see if you can do that okay. All right, check when you're ready. Okay, let's go ahead, let's check. Okay, so I'm going to go like this. The cosecant is the reciprocal of the sine, so you're just asking, where is the sine negative? The sine's a y value, so the question becomes, where is y negative? Okay, so y's negative there and there. So that's the 2 quadrants that happens in. And then the tangent is negative in quadrants 2 and 4. So what result did you get? I am hoping that you got quadrant 4. Okay, so that's it. Okay, the next one, the secant is the reciprocal of the cosine, so it will have the same value. And then this is defined in a unit circle. The cosine is an x value, so the question is, where is x negative? X is negative. No, hold on. You're doing positive, sorry. Where is x positive? This way. Okay, so that would be there, and it would be there. Okay. And then again, the cosecant is just the reciprocal of the sine, so you're really just asking the question, where is the sine negative? The sine is a y value. Y is negative down below. Okay, so it'd be there and there. So it looks like you would have got quadrant 4 on that also. So that would be a place where the secant and cosine are positive and the cosecant's negative. that's going to be quadrant 4. Okay, so that's it. Okay, that's what we're going to do. There's one other thing that you can do if you want to. Down below, there's a lot of things people have come up with over the years. And students a lot of times use this one. There's a statement, all students take calculus. And what this means is the A stands for all. And that means all of the trig functions are positive in quadrant 1. Okay, and that's what we already figured out. Okay, the S stands for sine. So you would have the positive sign, cosine and tangent then are negative. Okay, the T for take is tangent. So if you had sine, cosine, tangent, the tangent would be positive. The other two would be negative. Okay, and then the calculus stands for cosine. Okay, so it'd go like this. Okay, the cosine's positive, everything else is negative. Okay, so that's another kind of slick way to do that. I've seen students kind of tell me other ways of doing that and so forth. So that would be how you do that. I've seen several of them. I've seen all science teachers crazy. I saw that one time. Okay, and let's see. I had a couple of students tell me they came up with this one. Hey, we're all adults here. This is just a joke. They said all strippers take cash. I thought that was kind of funny. Okay, all right. Not to offend anybody. I'm just, come on, we're all adults here. Whatever it takes for you to remember that is fine. So you can use one of these statements or you can reason it out. Okay, so hopefully that helps you with that, and that will wrap up 7.3 for us. And hopefully you get all your work done effectively and understand the material well. Let me know if you have any concerns or questions. Thank you.